You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Man, I had someone just comment on one of the podcast clips that we posted, like, I don't know, probably a week or so ago, like, yo, why do you always look so tired? And, like, I didn't reply to it, but in my brain, I'm just like, yo, homie, it's because I'm so fucking tired. And,
you know what? I love that you were so tired that you didn't respond. Like, I'm gonna give this a week. Nothing tells you how tired I am. Like fuck you. I'm not. Look. How old was this person?
I don't know. I was too tired to click on their profile. I'm just like, you know what? You're right. Like, thanks for noticing. I hope you care. Thanks for caring if you do. Thanks for not caring if you don't. But fuck, I'm tired.
Yeah, I mean, look. There just becomes a certain age where if you've done life right, you just have a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
So like whenever I see someone like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, I'm like, are your parents rich? Like what's going on? Like how are you like 36 and not just in the fucking ground all the time? Like
happy.
1 foot in
How
the
are you
grave.
36 and happy.
Yeah, like your parents gotta have money. Like, or you're just high as fuck. Like that's why drugs were invented for people whose parents weren't rich. That's what it was. Like, hey, look, I know things didn't really quite go your way. Your childhood was kind of fucked up. But this is LSD. And it's going to be like what your life could have been like if your parents made money.
Yeah. There's got to be a bell curve that we can draw with this, with the types of drugs that people use, depending on how much money they grew up with.
Yeah, because at a certain point, the really rich and the really poor start doing the same drugs. You just get that Macaulay Culkin over there, like sitting there on Rogan, looking like he's 100 years old.
Oh, man.
Telling stories about Michael Jackson, and it's like he does the same drugs as the fucking kids I went to high school with. Like that guy's just freebased before he got on the podcast. But yeah, there's an odd middle ground of like I feel like the psychedelic community is kind of like the middle territory in drug use, where it's like no one's trying to die out here today, which is the ultra rich and the ultra poor are like, it might be the last day. Let's see what this needle has to say.
Oh man, yeah, that's wild. No, I'm just tired because responsibilities, and like the thing is, no matter how many responsibilities I have, I refuse to not train. Like it's something that I've always prioritized my entire life, and it's like, yeah, all right. There's maybe the sleep suffers a little bit. Maybe I'm waking up a little bit earlier, going to bed a little bit later, but I'll get everything done, and I'm still gonna train. And that's something that's like, I don't know, it's carried through my entire life. Like I grew up like wrestling, so it was always, all right, if you need to get shit done, you get shit done, but like you prioritize your workouts too. And
you know what? Do you remember, sorry to cut you off, but do you remember one of our first podcast guests, the last time I ran a mile, maybe the only time I've run a mile, it's not repressed in my memory.
Yeah,
Wes Pyatt, he dropped a quote on episode like 4 or whatever the fuck that was 100 years ago.
On.
And it kind of stuck with me. It's like, you know, he was having a kind of a similar conversation about responsibilities. You know, Wes is a family man, but also an accomplished CrossFit athlete. And he was like, it's selfish of people to not train. Yeah. Because it's like, you know, you said you have responsibilities, and it's like, training, regardless of your priorities, is part of every one of your responsibilities. Like, if you got people to look after in your life, like, and it's not always this. Like, you don't always got to be ready to fucking chuck hands or anything like that. But it definitely there's a time in your life where it might be useful, and it's like, yeah, dude, sure, 200-pound you is a problem. Like 168-pound you is a problem. Like, you know, so, but like, and looking past that to maybe like a more an adult take on it is like, yeah, your health, which, you know, maybe right now with where you're at in your training, we're not doing like, you know, maybe it's not the healthiest thing, but there is, I think, always an angle of selflessness to training for people. Even if it's just like, you know, doing something you like so you can show up as a version that's not a piece of shit for other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think there is a degree of selfishness necessary in life in general so that you can show up and be the person that you need to be in scenarios where you might have to be a little bit more selfless or where you have to provide for others. So I definitely I mean, that's training for me. Like, I'd be a fucking head case if I didn't train. Give me like an hour, hour and a half, 4 days a week, and I'm good. You take that away, and I'm going to be everyone's problem, not just my own.
Right. Cashier at the grocery store, not taking your coupon, like just fucking going nuts on people. Like, yeah, I mean, you know what? You get to a certain point in your, and I think it's strategic good and bad, right? Like, you know, I don't fare well in social situations, so I try and minimize how much I go out. I've tried to get better as I've gotten older, and I don't want to get better now, or I'm kind of at the limit of my patience, so I just choose to like not go out very often.
Right.
Like I went to the liquor store the other day to get a housewarming gift for a friend. I have not stepped foot in a liquor store. I don't drink in 17 years.
Yeah, I guarantee they thought you were going to rob the store when you walked in.
Oh yeah, I had a backpack on. I was wearing this. And I was just, yeah.
You wouldn't showing up as you.
Yeah, and that's, you know what, to be fair, I feel like most people when I walk by them are like, well, this is the uniform of the last guy I'm ever going to see. So I'm just like, well, so I'm kind of used to that vibe. And like, it's clear that I had no idea. I bought one with like a deer on it and it was expensive. I was like, I guess that's what, I don't know. I was going to call Schultz and be like, hey, what do whiskey drinkers drink? But like, you know, part of it is on me to like understand that, hey, look, whether I want to get better at this or not, I'm not going to, but it's my responsibility to not put myself continuously in situations where I'm going to be aggravated. And on the flip side of that, and this is something that was a real schedule productivity hack for me, is like, you know, you mentioned off the jump that people are like, oh, you're really tired. It's like, and not to complain, and it's not complaining, because it's actually awesome that we get to push this rock up the hill together. But like, there's so much that goes into running a business. It's insane. Right. So for those of you who don't know, who listen to RX, like Jay and I and our co-founder, or our business partner, might as well be co-founder, Matt Penny, we run a fitness education company called Prescript. Started it from an idea in our head almost 10 years ago. And like, there's a lot that goes into it. And one of the things that I found as you and I were like trying to traversing, I mean, not even so much the early days, but I think a big turning point for me was starting to realize what it is exactly that training did for me. Like, you know, I used to train at like 5 p.m. I kind of liked the rush of the traffic in the gym. Like, I liked a little bit of competitive. Like, give me a fucking 20-year-old kid that wants to fucking try and clang and bang with me. And like, I don't know, I'm weird, like sick in the head like that. But now it's like, you know, when I'm done training, I'm usually like pretty energized, whether it's the residual stimulant intake or whether it's like the endorphins or the neurotransmitters or the hormones or whatever. So I started to realize that like when I was breaking up my work day and I was planning my schedule, that I'm like pretty chatty after I train. I'm pretty creative after I train. But sometimes I would just like have a nap. And I'm like, what a wait. And I wake up and I'm like, where the fuck am I? And I'm like, well, this is dumb. Like, I have this window now of a little bit more energy than I'm usually walking around with. So what I started to do was I would push my training sessions early and then I would work right after. And like, so you just understand the effect that training has on you. Because some people, it's like, hey, maybe that's a great time for a nap. Maybe you're just fucking dog shit useless after a training session and you need to go down for 20. But I think like training is such a shift in your physiology that it affects your psychology. But like, understand like, hey, what is that effect in psychology and physiology and the marriage of those two? What does that leave me in a really good spot to do now to like maximize my day? I don't think many people think about the, you know, you talk about like phasic potentiation in training. I still remember the first episode where you brought up the principle of phasic potentiation or phase potentiation in training. I kind of look at my day like that. Like, what does one thing lead me into to do the next and the next and the next? And for me, you know, training sets me up to have like kind of this rocket fuel couple of hours of high-end productivity. And then after that, it's going to dwindle off and I'll go do something else. But it was really that created the awareness around how my activities set myself up for success for the things that I had to do. And now I'm like cognizant of, you know, well, you know, training does this, eating certain foods does this, sleeping does this, napping does this, being outside does this, walking does. So it's like, it's almost like, okay, if I need to do a particular task, it's like, well, what is the activity that's going to drive the state for me to perform that task the best, and I just do that activity first, regardless of like, you know, that activity could be sleeping, it could be eating, it could be eating a particular thing, it could be, you know, taking a particular supplement or fucking drug, and then I kind of plan that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. And it's funny because it's so different for me, the way that maps out throughout my day. But I actually do the same exact thing. Like for me, it's always caffeine and brain tasks in the morning. Like if I wake up 6 o'clock earlier and I work out right away, like I'm going to be trashed by 1 p.m. that day. Like I'm going to be fucking in bed. I'm going to be a piece of shit. So it's like for me, wake up, work, caffeinate, get things done. And then like late morning, like early afternoon is like, that's my training window, because it's like, all right, my brain's tired from doing whatever I've done staring at a screen all morning. Like I need to move my body now. And then after that, there's like a bit of a lull where I'm just fucked. Like I'm just useless after I train, because I try and murder myself every single time. But it's like, all right, these are body tasks now. These are things where I can just like move through my day and shut off my brain until I have that period where it's like, all right, my brain's back online again. But you make an interesting point on how like everything kind of plays into this, and there's going to be effects of whether it's training, whether it's diet, whether it's sleep. All these things are going to interplay with the way that your cognitive capacity, the way that you're thinking throughout the day, the way that you're feeling throughout the day, and that's going to have an interaction with the tasks that you have. So like that's a really good way to plan your day, is like thinking, okay, how is this going to make me feel physically, mentally, cognitively, and then organizing around that thing so you can kind of, I mean, it's an overused word at this point, but that's like optimizing your time, or being efficient with your time so you can make the most out of everything that you're doing.
I think that if you can zoom that principle out, and something that I've been noticing lately, because we were talking the other episode about how you're in a bulk and I'm in a cut.
Yeah.
And I'm like consistently waking up now at my former competition weight, which like you kind of joked before. You're like, well, it wasn't really, you were that for like 10 minutes and then you were like fucking 260 within an hour. So I'm like waking up routinely at 242. And I was driving last week. I got my back tattooed, or started my back tattoo. And I drove about 4 hours down south to my buddy Brett Moss. Shout out Brett Moss, Classic Tattoo Windsor. And so I drove in the night before, got tattooed the majority of the next day, and then drove back to Toronto after. And so what I noticed, and it's something that I never really attributed, because I've always trying to get bigger. This is the first time I've put together probably like 4 months of like a pretty concerted effort to be in a net deficit week over week. Like, there are social aspects of our job. Like I don't drink. But you're meeting with people, you're going out to dinner, and there are ways where you can stay in a deficit with how you plan your week of nutrition. Like this week's a big social week for me. Like I was out to dinner last night. I'll go out for lunch and dinner tomorrow. I'm in New York at a conference on Friday, so I'll be out to dinner Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Right. So I'm looking at this week and I'm just being like, hey. I probably got to chop a deficit every single day that's a little bit more considerable than where I've been, because, 3 nights out eating out in New York City is going to be, you're not going to do it if you just look at the day. And one of the things that kind of dawned on me when I was driving to and from Windsor is, and I started to be really empathetic to your situation, because I am like, with my travel schedule and always being on the heavier side, I could fall asleep like a Marine, just without the toughness. Like I can fall asleep like a drop of a hat. And because you realize it's like, man, like everyone's like, oh, weight vest, fuck a weight vest, man. I've been wearing that weight vest. Like imagine living your life 30 pounds heavier, 30 pounds lighter, and being in that fluctuation. This is the first time I drove, regardless, first time I drove from Toronto to Windsor and back without feeling like I was going to fall asleep at the wheel. Right? Like one of my heaviest earlier this year, I was in Iceland and I was driving the south coast of Iceland, and I would just periodically pull over to the side of the road and just take a nap in a field in my rental car. Like I'm just, hilarious. I was literally you. I was just fucking cooked. And it was funny because there are other things now that I'm, I did it deliberately, knowing that the last quarter of the year was going to be like a lot of travel, like really ramping up. New York, Seattle, going to be overseas. We're going to have a pre-script event in just outside of Prague, a pre-script event in Singapore. So I was like, look, my knees hurt when I fucking travel. I'm too heavy. Everything sucks. So I'm like, I'm going to really try and cut it back. But then I started to notice that I did it with other behaviors. Like, I noticed this when I would take like a ton of drugs. Like when you and I just like, and maybe I won't implicate you, but like me and someone else I know, if we take eat like a fucking, a face full of shrooms, I feel pretty good. Like that next week, I'm kind of like, all the stuff I'm stressed about. And I started to realize like, wow, it's not just a micro effect of like you deliberately curating your environment for productivity on a day-to-day basis, but like you can really expand that, right? I had a friend of mine, Adil Khan, just moved. Dr. Khan's been on the podcast a few times. I was talking to him this morning, and it reminded me of something. He had just moved to Dubai, and I was like, yo, how you like it so far? I'd lived in Dubai for most of, I think 2021, I lived in Dubai for most of that year. And he's like, it's kind of rough. And I'm like, yeah, dude, it is rough. But I really found to enjoy it because it like offers you something different. You're in a different time zone. It's the abyss. You're literally in the middle of the fucking desert. Yeah. So it's like curating your environment deliberately to hack your own psychology and physiology is like you just live in a different world. Like when you learn how to do that, when you learn how much your environment and what you intake, whether it's people you follow on social media or the foods that you eat or the places that you go or the people that you talk to, that's really going to dictate more than the lion's share of the road of how you get stuff done. Like it's going to dictate your outputs. So it's interesting to see people try and focus on the outputs only. And it's like, why don't you just change the pitch, frequency, cadence, and tone of the inputs, and that'll change your outputs as a byproduct.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and kind of what I'm pulling from that is you learn from the variance, right? You've been in a surplus, you've been gaining weight, you're now in a deficit, you're now losing weight, and there's positive benefits that come with each of those things. But if you stay in one of those or you stay in the middle and you don't see that swing from one side to the other, then you're never really going to see the positive benefits of either side of that, right? So I think that's something that is necessary if you want to have that kind of outlook where you can look at the inputs that you're putting into the system and you can choose the appropriate input for the output you're trying to elicit. Because there's a ton of things that I find beneficial for being as heavy as I am and like doing the day-to-day lifestyle things that I'm doing right now, but there's also negatives that come with that. It's like prescription drugs. Like there's not just effects and side effects. It's all just effects of the drug, right? There's like effects of the lifestyle that you're living. So if you can identify it, and some of these things are going to be mutually exclusive to, we'll stick with the diet, being in a caloric surplus versus being in a caloric deficit, but not everything is mutually exclusive, right? And so there can be things that coexist that is a benefit of being over here, benefit of being over here that you can pull from, and you can start to utilize those as inputs to make your outputs more effective on a day-to-day basis or on a time where the diet isn't as extreme. And you can start to look at everything like that. There's going to be periods like, say, when we were in school and we were training and we were trying to figure out life. Like, I didn't sleep much then because I had a ton of stress. And being in a period of less sleep, less recovery, like I learned ways where I can become more efficient with less energy expenditure in other areas because that's just simply, I didn't have the bandwidth to do it any other way. Versus now I have a little bit more time, I can sleep a little bit more, I'm better rested, and I see the positive benefits of that. So it's like, if you see both sides of that swing, then you can kind of pick and choose and you can make a more informed, educated decision on the lifestyle variables that you want to implement so that you can have the outputs that you need to have. Like if you're trying to push in training, yeah, you're probably going to need the food. You're probably going to need the sleep, the hydration, the stress management. But where's that going to take away from? Like that might take away from business because you're allocating all your resources to performance in the gym. Versus there might be a time where it's very stressful through the business and you don't have the bandwidth to be sleeping extra or to focus on, I have to hit this many calories today or I need to hit this number in my workout. So you pull resources from the gym and you allocate it towards business or towards school or whatever that other thing is. So I think the more you have that kind of swing or that variance in each of these lifestyle factors, then you can start to pick and choose where you want to pull from to maximize the outputs that you're having in the specific areas that you need to perform in at that given time.
I think of the old quote, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade.
Yeah.
I feel like you always have a lemon. Like, because I think of...
Always got fucking lemons.
You always got a lemon, dog. Because it's like, I think of... The surplus deficit thing is an easy center point because we're kind of in a weird contrast where I'm the lightest I've been for a really long time and you're the heaviest you've been for a really long time.
I woke up at 2:05 today, homie.
You know what? This isn't a radio show. We're going to call in Jorge De Hoyos right now. Get Jorge on the show. That's nuts. But the point about the lemons is like, look, sometimes circumstances can be very hard to change, but there are things you can always optimize for. There's things that you have, like for example, like you're in a position where you're in a deliberate surplus. Okay, cool. There's probably restaurants you want to go to. There's probably a social calendar that you want to, that when you're in competition mode, like, sorry, man, can't go out to eat. I got to meet in 4 weeks. It's like, all right, yeah, you're optimizing for that. And it's like, I think people I don't know. And I don't know if I like the quote or the principle, but like, it's like life kind of happens in seasons of like, and then one of my favorite books, actually I think I have it here somewhere. It's called, what the fuck is it? It's called Walden and Civil Disobedience. You ever read this?
No.
It's basically about a guy who like fucks off. I think it's a true story. It's actually about the author Henry David Thoreau. He like kind of fucks off the world and goes and lives on this lake called Walden Lake for like 2 years. And he kind of talks about like just kind of noticing, like draws parallels between the seasons in life. And it's like, if it's snowing, make fucking snow angels. Like don't complain that it's cold, right? Like if there's stuff that I can do in a fairly significant deficit over time, that I can drive to Windsor back and forth and not get tired. It's like, cool.
Yeah.
Can I bench fucking 400 pounds or can I squat 700 pounds? Like, no. But that was that season, right? Like everyone wants to go to the beach in the winter. It's like, why don't you fucking go make snow angels, you idiot? Like it's such a frame shift where, the environment that I think you're always living in is the framing of your environment in your own mind. And it's like, I'm curious because you're in the throes, like you're in one right now. Like I've been that, like when I got up to like 290, like, it's relative, right? Like, and I see I see the orbicularis oculi fighting to keep your eyeballs open. Like that's what I see. Yeah. It's like, I feel like
I'm listening, man. I might just be listening with my eyes closed.
Yeah. What's keeping your eyes open? Bloat. Like bloat is just keeping, like,
it's retention.
It's like, have you ever seen the movie Prisoners where they beat up like the retarded guy who thinks he stole his, and they take the thing off and his face is all swollen. Yeah, it's like,
I'm the retarded guy.
Yeah. You're about 5 grams, but you're the retarded guy. Yeah. Wow. Holy. What a podcast.
We got lemons, though.
We got lemons. Yeah, the retarded guy's got lemons. And that'll be it for us here at RX Radio. Yeah. Thank you all very much for listening. It's been a good 567 episodes. No, but fuck's sake. But like, I'm curious you've been someone who's gone to extremes in the deficit and extremes in the surplus. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, I think I man. I know. I never really weighed this out, and like the discomforts of where I'm at right now are very real to me. So I think I dislike this more right now, but there's nothing better than walking up to a bar. Like I loaded 230 kilos on a barbell yesterday, and I've never touched it. That's the heaviest bar I've ever put on my shoulders by 10 kilos. Like I've never squatted that heavy in my life. I walked up to it with confidence and I fucking grinded it out and I squatted it and I'm like, yo, like this is a good fucking feeling. Like that's a high. That's like, that's the high for the week after doing mushrooms. That's like, I'm good on that. It's like, and that's a lifetime accomplishment for me. I've been like, that's been in the sights for fucking years. So like putting myself in a position to actually execute on that, like that's good. That's like that's the delayed gratification of training right there. That's the moment of culmination where it's like, yo, this has taken like literally 2.5 decades of training to be able to do this, to put myself in a position where I can do this. And that's a pretty fucking good feeling.
Devil's advocate, talking about the throes of the discomfort you're currently in, but you're also in the throes of the elation of the accomplishment.
Right,
there are accomplishments that you made when you were, crazy lean, crazy fit in the CrossFit days. Can you equate them, or is this like, we're trying to compare fucking LeBron to Kobe or LeBron to Jordan or something like that?
Yeah, so I guess a parallel to that, and maybe CrossFit's a good one because there's some surreal moments there, especially because that was earlier on in my training career, and I hadn't really accomplished anything of notoriety to that point. Like,
I haven't really done anything. I was just a retarded kid with lemons. Like
a piece of shit that hangs out at the gym, and I'm still that same piece of shit, but I've done cooler things. But like through CrossFit, through weightlifting, there have been times where maybe weightlifting's a better one in this particular conversation because I've had to cut weight to accomplish specific goals. And I remember the first time I qualified for nationals at weightlifting, because there's like a qualification process for you to be able to compete at the national level. And that was a big goal of mine, but I had to lose weight to do it. So like that was something where I had to cut weight and I had to maintain strength to be able to do it. And like I had the meet. I qualified at 77 kilos. I totaled like 274, which was like exactly the total, hit it on the nose. And like it was like a later meet, and I was probably like, I probably lifted it. Session started around 6 p.m. I got out of there 9:30, and I just sat down in the car and I fucking cried. Like because it was like again, similar thing, like a culmination of training and like all of the sacrifices that I made to get to that point. And like that to me, it felt like in the moment a bigger accomplishment than squatting 500 did, because it felt like that squat I hit it was almost a formality. It's like, I'm sure you've had these things like PRs or like landmarks that you've broken through in training where it's like, no, I should be able to do this. Like you almost, I don't want to say feel entitled to do it, but you know that you've put in the work and it's like, no, this is a formality. Like I'm going to do this. And then like there's more, I'm hungry for more. So it's like, it wasn't necessarily that surreal moment that like, holy shit, I did that. Which qualifying for nationals, which was a goal that aligned with me having to lose weight and be in a deficit and be able to do this specific thing under these very constrained variables, that felt like a bigger accomplishment to me in the moment than that squat did.
Is it, how much does, because like I think there's a deeper conversation to be had here about reward systems, right? And the framework that you've set out or that's been set out for you is there's hardwired more impactful reward systems in the entire, just in the procedure and the process of going through and qualifying, right? Like because the qualification is something that there's something that you lose out on if you don't do it, where there's nothing that you lose out on if you don't squat 500 pounds, right? Like, and this is where, and it's tough because I don't necessarily think competition needs to be for everyone. I mean, competition is a part of reward. It's what allows us to establish, like hierarchies within certain class systems, and that's not bad. It drives progress. But I think you can always set, like you bought into a very rigid, well-established system of the qualification model that's just been around forever. But it was like kind of at the end of the day, like if you strip it all away, it's like it's all kind of made up, right? Yeah. Like it's all kind of just photons coming through the air at the end of the day. Like you can really dissect it down to as meaningful or as meaningless as the squat, as this conversation, as whatever. But I think everyone has the opportunity to find to find the lemon in that situation, like to create a framework around, reassuring success by really incentivizing that reward system, right? Like, because nutrition is hard for people. And you know what? Like for me, honestly, the big thing that drove it was just pain. Like just how much physical pain I was in. Like I remember being with you in Sydney. And like there were points where I'm like, I can't walk. Like, are you okay? I'm like, no, I am in searing pain. And it's like, fuck, dude, this sucks. Like it's just, and that's what it took for me. And like, you know, I wasn't like the fattest guy in the world at 270 or whatever, but like, you know, that was the motivating factor. And I feel better in a deficit, even when I try to standardize for, you know, because I pulled heavy in competition, squatted heavy in competition. I've won a few competitions. I've traveled all over the world to compete in strength sports. And even though that I had those sanctioned things, like it's very similar to you, where I went to a place where there were other people, I did a thing, I qualified for a thing, I won a thing, I got a trophy. The reward system that I had built in my own brain to get out of pain was a far more potent reward system, even though that no one said anything. And I don't give a fuck. Like I've lost 30 pounds in the last 4 or 5 months, but it's like the reward system of, you know, I can actually push my training a little bit harder now and getting that every single day. So it's funny because we're coming at this from different angles of like, you know, what your reward system that you've built was around competition and around exclusivity and around kind of like, hey, look, I'm able to do what no one else is able to do. You know, when I was, you know, we were in very parallel places around the same time where you were ascending in CrossFit and Olympic lifting. You carried that along much further than I did. And then I was, you know, creeping up in the strength sport powerlifting world. But for me right now, like the reward system I built around not being in pain is way more rewarding, even though there's no trophies and there's no competition. But I think the proof of the concept that I want people to hear isn't like, oh, I should compete in something or I should get out of pain. It's like, no. You get to choose. Yeah. Like you get to choose the ultimate reward system that's going to help drive adherence. Because like there are times where it's like I've made this joke on the podcast 100 times because it's not a joke. It's like I could eat a cheesecake, and by the time I was done, my elbows would be screaming. Like that's how sub-threshold of searing pain I was in from a systemic inflammation standpoint. Like if you move the needle at all, if you hold on to another ounce of water, you're just going to be, and I would sit there and I would do it anyways. But after 2 days, like most meals, and you're in this right now, most meals at the end of it, I remember sitting outside of a sushi restaurant in Santana Row. It's not there anymore. It was tucked under Hotel Valencia. It was called Blowfish. Yeah. Hotel Valencia on Santana Row. I remember finishing dinner with a few people and like, you know, outside of like a window, there's like sometimes a brick ledge that just comes out the length of a brick and it's not really enough to like sit on, but you can kind of like lean on it a bit. I remember leaning against this brick ledge with both of my hands on my knees after going out to dinner with people. And this is like, I don't know, like friends or whatever, like people I should be making an impression on. And I'm sitting there just like heavy breathing, hands on the knees, like, oh, I think I'm going to throw up. I was like, dude, you went out to dinner with like 4 adults and you're sitting there like about to puke on your shoes. Like get it together.
That's hilarious.
Oh, dude, it was nuts. But again, you can build your own reward system. And it's fuck, dude, the number of times I've said it about framing your problems properly.
Yeah.
And that's how you solve your problems. Like now it's like, I'm so driven by the reward system that I got to choose.
Yeah.
It's like, then fucking just choose the right reward system that's going to keep you adherent, right? Because I know you're in one, right? Like I know that what you're going through is like, dude, you just want like a salad and a walk where your legs don't chafe. Like that's kind of where you're at, right? Like,
yeah, dude.
Oh man.
Yeah, I know. I have new aches and pains every day when I just move my body. Like getting off the couch when we finish this podcast, it's going to take a bit of motivation. It's going to take a bit. But I think something that the average person doesn't do well, and I think it's out of ignorance and in an innocent way. It's like, why would you know this shit unless you spend your life learning this shit? But I think a big part of being successful in that way comes from accurately calibrating expectations around the inputs that are going into the system and the outputs that are coming out of it, right? Like something I encounter almost on a daily fucking basis is people who are putting themselves in the position you're in right now. They're in a caloric deficit, but they still have performance goals and they still have maybe strength goals that they're looking to accomplish, even though the input into that system, which the input is less calories, so the output's going to be less available energy, it puts you in a position where you're not setting yourself up for success if those goals don't align with your expectations of the inputs that you're eliciting, that you're choosing to put into the system. And I think that's an important message that needs to be out there, is like, look, there's pretty well established guidelines to this stuff, especially when it comes to like calories in, calories out, and like input, output in terms of physical capacity, right? Like it's everyone wants to be leaner. They want to look good. They want to be stronger. They want to move faster, and they want it all right now. But that's not realistic. Like, you can't do all of those things at the same time. There's specific things, and this stuff has to happen. Like, going back to a point that you brought up earlier is like phase potentiation, or there's phases that are going to allow you to be successful in each one of these specific goals. If you have the proper input, it's going to give you the output that you want. But you can't have the input of, I want to be smaller, I want there to be less of me, but at the same time, I want to choose what parts there's less of me, and choose which parts there's more of me, and choose the way that I'm able to perform in the gym. Like, it's just not realistic. Like, someone that goes into body composition or performance goals with those sorts of expectations, they're setting themselves up for failure. There's literally no way you can have success in that. And that's a conversation I find myself having so often, so often, especially because a lot of what I do, it's in either rehab or performance. I don't deal much with body composition goals, but these things typically, they run parallel. Is it people that have performance goals, people that are rehabbing to do something meaningful, there's typically a body composition goal they have that runs parallel to that. And the harder conversation to have is like, okay, I understand that that's what you want to do, but that's improbable right now. Or we can't really do that right now. We have to do this first, and then eventually we can get there. So I guess where I'm leading with this is my question for you. Since you are in a deficit, you've lost 30 pounds, like, what does that look like in terms of performance in the gym, in terms of expectations, in terms of what modifications have you made to training because of the inputs that you have into the system? What are your expectations in terms of outputs?
Yeah, it's reframing, right? Like, you want to talk about environment. When I started this process, and then I know, and here's the crazy part. When you start to understand yourself a little bit, like whether it's psychologically, whether it's physiologically, and part of understanding, and this is key, part of understanding yourself physiologically is understanding physiology. Because there's actually not that much variance in human physiology that's meaningful. Like, this idea that people are like, oh, me and my coach still trying to figure out my body. And like, that's the gayest thing I've ever heard. And number two, it's like, well, your coach is not going to figure out your body because your coach doesn't understand the body. So like, if he's trying to learn on you, the test dummy, good luck with acute pancreatitis or whatever dumb shit he's going to end up putting you in, because he needs to understand. So, and on the psychological side, the same. Like, if you don't fucking really try and dive in, but the thing is, you realize that even as you go through these types of deliberate environmental changes to hack your own reward systems, I don't like the word hack because it's really just understanding these things. What you start to understand is like, oh, there's just like the Dunning-Kruger, there's so much I don't understand that dictates my behavior. So in what little I did understand, I immediately switched to a gym where I walked 30 minutes there and 30 minutes back. So that was like thing number one. But that now became like a little bit of a goal of like, I never really focused on steps ever. Mm-hmm. I started looking at my steps and like, dude, I was averaging like 2,000 a day. Again, it's hard to run a business. Yeah, Captain 2000 sitting on the couch, right? And if the fridge was a little closer, it would be less steps again. So, but I was like, all right, I've immediately gone to a point now where I can start to, I can put a line item on my daily success board and be like, oh, look at that. It's checked before it was even up there. because all I did was change my behavior. So now it's like, I look at my steps and it's like, 10K easy between walk there and back, get a coffee later, might walk to dinner if I go out, if I have to go out. And it's like, all right, well, that's like thing number one. The battle was won before it was fought. It was like, that's so easy. And now I have a reward system that's automatically going to feed me and positively reinforce me. I didn't weigh myself very often before because I didn't care, because it was a little bit more performance driven. It was an extra rep here, or it was like an extra inch on my arms or whatever. But it's like, why would I measure my arms now? That's a dumb way of like, oh, I hope, like, what? It's going to get smaller. Like, why would I do that? It's so dumb. And performance is very similar to that. So, now I weigh myself on like pretty much a daily basis, because a couple 100 grams here and there, it's like, yeah, dude, we're fucking cooking. And then, and I understand managing expectations, and some days I'll be a pound up and like, okay, whatever, back to work. But on the performance piece more specifically, it's like, I understand what constitutes. We did an entire podcast about detraining. So I understand the training intensity is really going to keep that up. So, and the volume is going to be the thing that's slightly different. So I've adjusted my training volume to accommodate for being in a deficit. I would say the number of exercises I do per session is down. On average, 1 to 2 exercises get cut out a training session. I like training a lot. Like, I like keeping my training frequency pretty high. I'll do things that are more attuned or more in line with what some people might see as more conventional recovery modalities. So supplementation or like that. If I'm eating a ton of food, we're good, man. We're fucking good. I'm not reaching for the pill cabinet to try and get a little bit of this and that. There's a conversation to be had about supplementation and objective outcomes we might save for another podcast. But I'm taking a lot more focus on supplementation, because I know I'm getting less near the mark, because I'm not getting all the food sources I was getting in before. And then with the training itself, I'm picking exercises that I can improve upon, and I'm getting a deliberately novel, or what I would call specific variability. I'm getting performance improvements by picking exercises that I know I'm bad at, and then just learning the skill. I know I'm going to plateau once I get the skill, but again, I've hacked the reward system. It's like, I'll look at an exercise that I'm not great at, or use a variation I haven't used in a while. And there's a learning period within a couple of weeks where I'm probably not pushing at max capacity, which is great, because my max capacity isn't my max capacity. And then I'm going to get some skill adaptation of learning how to do it. Like, I've been back on Bulgarians for a while, and now they're getting kind of heavy, and I'll probably switch it up. So I think a thing that's so often lost is, people look at this, like, metaphorically, this track that they're running on, and they're running at a certain speed, making progress in size or strength or performance in general. And then they purposefully they change the surface of the track from Mondo to sand. Yeah. And then they get mad when they start running slower. It's like, dog, make sandcastles then and enter into a sandcastle making competition. You can't do that on Mondo. You can't win a sandcastle making competition on Mondo track. So it's like, I know this. So it's like, I'm going to change my outcome. I know I'm going to run into sand, right? So, I supplement a little bit differently. My stimulants are higher now than they've been before. I still am focused on performance as far as getting good training sessions in. But I've just been way more specifically variable with the exercises that I choose, because at the end of the day, that's not the thing I'm chasing right now. Like, it's not, when I was a power lifter, it's like, yeah, it's going to be deadlifting every Friday forever. And because that's just very regimented, and it's, the how often I would phase in a new variant of the movement, 8, 12 weeks when performance stopped moving. But it's like, now it's like my variability is really high. I kind of walk into a gym and I have it's deliberate. It's not like I'm walking in and just flying by the seat of my pants. I have probably 4 variations of every training session that I do. So like a pull, a ABCD, a push ABCD, a lower ABCD, and there's subtle variations, but I can't expect the same performance if I RDL before a leg press or after a leg press on the RDL. I just go like, well, the context of the environment has changed. I just want to push to whatever failure is on that day, and I know the intensity will stay relatively high. So that's where I think, again, the mondo to sand, it's like, well, I wonder what's going to happen. It's like, what the fuck you think's going to happen, dude? You're running in sand. You're not going to run that fast. But what can you do in sand that you can't do in other, like on a track? Make fucking sand castles. So that's, and I'm cool with it, man. And like, here's the thing. You mentioned something earlier about when you really push, and most people kind of oscillate in this territory of mediocrity. Some kid at the gym came up to me the other day and he's like, oh, I notice you always wear pants. I'm like, I'm not going to give you the spiel about like, why core body temperature matters in performance. If you're making a crack about my legs, I was like, yeah, here's a video of me squatting 750 pounds. You got anything to say? No? Then how about you, go fist yourself? How much do you squat? What's the most you've ever squat? Oh, 405? That's adorable. All right. Can I wear my fucking pants? Please leave me alone. I push, man. I've been there. Right? No one's going to say I haven't fucking been there. Been there with quite literally the best of them. So like, but people fluctuate in this gap of mediocrity of like, oh, I'm getting small. My shirts don't fit. I should probably bulk up. And they say this kind of like skinny, fat, weak potato. Yeah. That's just like on and off cycle. It's like, this is me on Winstraw. This is me not on Winstraw. It's like, you look like shit, like on both of them. So there's merit in really, and like, I'm hoping to get, what will I look like if I'm 215? Right? Like, would I be inside out? Is 215 to the point where I'm just fucking inside out shredded? It's like, I don't know. We'll see. It hasn't been hard because I understand how curating the environment is going to dictate the reward system. And that box is already checked before it's on the board. And it's like, it's not hard when you understand yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you made a really good point in there about variance and intensity, which is a conversation, like it's part of the conversation every time when I talk to someone that has these body composition goals, but they don't understand the performance implications with it. And I think people start to obsess over the more objective variables of, I used to use this amount of weight on this exercise and I can't do that anymore. And that's setting yourself up for failure here, right? It's the wrong expectation to have. I think people, and this is a bit more subjective and maybe a bit more advanced concept or mindset when it comes to training, but variance is going to make things harder or easier, depending on which way you vary it. But if you're doing things that you're not as well versed in, like you said, the skill level's not there, then that variance is going to make it significantly harder, especially if you're in a caloric deficit. And then the conversation I tend to have with them is around intensity and the way that they're defining intensity in their training. And I try to make it a lot less objective around the idea of, I used to do my Bulgarians with a 120-pound dumbbell, and now I'm using an 80. I try and keep that conversation around like switching from hard numbers to RPE, right? If you're going in the gym and there's less of you and you have less energy available, what you can do is the more accurately you can assign an RPE to what you're doing, that's something that you can hit no matter what dumbbell there is in the gym, whether it's a 35-pound dumbbell or a 135-pound dumbbell, right? Is you can go in and you can have a set that's RPE 8 to 9 every single time. And if you can start to change the target or move your sights from, all right, I want to go from the 135 to the 140 to the 145 to, no, my goal isn't necessarily strength oriented right now. It's more body composition oriented. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to fucking send it on this set and I'm going to make it hurt until my legs are shaking and I can't stand up anymore. Then I've fulfilled that intensity requirement for this exercise, right? It's not necessarily an objective intensity that I'm going from 135 to 140, but it's my intensity is the requisite intensity for me to meet failure. And that's the goal. I'm walking in the gym every single day and I'm going to go as hard as I can on this particular exercise. And you can always modify that exercise with variance, whether it's bilateral load, unilateral load, whether it's a Smith machine, whether it's a hack squat. You can change that up to modulate intensity in a I don't know, maybe less meaningful way where it's not necessarily a progression of weight, but you're using an intensity and then you're taking that set to the place where you need to take it to get those results. And understanding that if you're in a caloric deficit and there's less energy available to you, you're probably not going to be able to take it objectively as far. But in terms of expenditure, you're expending the amount of energy you need to do to continue to push the envelope in the direction that the inputs you're inputting into the system will allow you to do.
This is where consistency in your nutrition is so big, because if you're in a consistent deficit and you don't have massive fluctuations in your calorie intake, you will only perform at the level to which you can recover.
Yes.
Which is like, I don't understand. I don't understand. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't understand how people struggle with, I mean, I understand because they struggle with staying consistent in their nutrition, but like there's such a baked in safeguard component to this process of like the auto regulation starts with the input of your nutrition, which then drives a lesser output of your performance, which as long as you're feeding that machine the same, will be within the requisite window of that machine to repair itself, given the amount of intake that led to the spike in performance. It's like if you were doing some fluctuation in your diet where you were eating to perform, but then drastically under eating to recover, it's like that's where you run into problems. And it's the inconsistency in the nutrition that's going to leave you kind of out in no man's land. But if you're going to be like, all right, I'm going to cut, 350 to 450, 500 calories a day, and you're consistent with that, your energy levels in the gym will dictate a performance that's going to be less, but less to the amount that you can recover from, because the next day you're still going to be in that 550 calorie deficit or your 500 calorie deficit, right? So there's a lot of factors that you need to play into it. But I think the biggest thing and what you're aiming for is you're aiming for the consistency factor. And all of your decisions need to be made around, well, what's going to make this process the most consistent for me? For me, it's recalibrating your reward systems. It's recalibrating what you value. It's like actually measure the thing that matters in that season of your training. If it's body composition, it's like, then why do I care? Not care, like, it's important. It just doesn't matter right now. There's a differentiation between knowing what's important and what doesn't matter, right? And so, yeah, like, is it important? Sure, performance is important. Let's go for an RPE 10 on everything, understanding that our inputs will dictate the magnitude of our outputs and our recovery. Inputs being nutrition, outputs being training, and then subsequent inputs being the recovery that fuels that next cycle. But it's like, I just, why people start running in sand deliberately and question why they're slowing down. It's just like, I don't know, man. Make hay while the sun shines. Like lemons make you lemonade. If you're going to get shredded, get fucking shredded. Like, if you're going to get big, get fucking big. Like, but at the end of the day, set yourself up psychologically, environmentally to be successful by the terms that you get to dictate. Like, it's not hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Absolutely
it.
agree. That's it.
That's it. That's the one. So we're going to wrap it here for this week, guys. I appreciate you hanging out. Just a quick note about the change in the podcast. If you guys have been listening for a while, the Friday show, I think I've been calling it the Monday show, the Friday show over on Spotify with Jorge De Hoyos and Brandon Schultz, Strength and Context, that goes live on Friday. So head on over, subscribe to that channel. Sunday show, the Brother James's, with Paint the Edges podcast on Spotify as well. So head on over there. And then, of course, holding it down, as always, on the Wednesday, as we have been for so many years now, RX Radio. Probably going to get a new thumbnail here in a bit. So if you're on Spotify, share with your friends. Rate. We got a lot. Man, have you checked?
No.
How many Spotify, 5-star fucking ratings we got? Shout out to you guys for showing up. It's like,
appreciate you.
It was a lot. I was on there today kind of floating around. We got to change some stuff up. Where are we at here? 262.
Hey, hell yeah.
We got a 4.8. So let's keep those numbers high. Appreciate everything. And if you guys ever need anything, YouTube, find us on YouTube. I think we'll probably be most interactive there. If you guys want to hear something, just leave a comment on the video. If not, that's it for this week. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.